Awaken your spirit, chosen ones. The moment you stop asking for permission, reality starts negotiating with you instead. Most people never reach that moment. They orbit systems, groups, trends, and expectations like satellites, useful, visible, but never in control of direction. Then someone steps out of formation. No announcement, no rebellion speech, just a quiet refusal to keep moving where everyone else is going. That's when things get strange. Not mystical, structural. Because systems are built to reward compliance, not independence. When someone exits the script and still moves forward, the system has to respond. Here's a grounded fact most people don't like to admit. Almost every major shift in culture, business, science, or power came from individuals who worked alone far longer than anyone applauded them. Not because they hated people, but because clarity doesn't survive committee meetings. Progress usually starts with one person thinking uninterrupted for an uncomfortably long time. History later calls it vision. At the time, it just looked like isolation. Going solo isn't glamorous. It doesn't come with theme music or instant recognition. It comes with long stretches of silence, self-doubt, and doing the work without witnesses. And yes, sometimes it comes with the awkward moment where people ask what you're doing, and you don't even have a neat answer yet. That's the part nobody posts. But here's the twist, and this is where it gets interesting. When you keep moving without external reinforcement, something flips. Your decisions get sharper. Your tolerance for nonsense drops. Your internal compass gets loud. And oddly enough, opportunities start rearranging themselves around you. Not because you chased them, but because you became precise. Also, quick humor break. This is usually the stage where people say, "You've changed," as if growth is a software bug and not the entire point. This isn't about being special. It's about being uncompromised. And when someone goes solo and doesn't collapse, reality does what it always does with consistency and courage. It adjusts. Sometimes it even crowns it. Number 1, you went solo because consensus would have made you smaller. There comes a moment when you realize that agreement has a price. It's subtle at first. You notice your ideas getting trimmed to fit the room. Your instincts get softened so they don't make anyone uncomfortable. Your thoughts start sounding familiar, not because they're true, but because they're acceptable. Consensus does that. It doesn't argue with you, it slowly edits you. Going solo wasn't about rebellion or ego, it was about survival. You understood, maybe without words, that staying would cost you something you couldn't afford to lose. Not status, not comfort, yourself. When too many voices shape one direction, the sharp edges disappear. And those edges were the very things that made your thinking effective. Groups reward alignment, not depth. They move at the speed of agreement, not insight. You saw that staying meant repeating what already worked, instead of building what hadn't existed yet. Consensus prefers predictable outcomes. You were heading toward something untested, and that made people uneasy. Not because it was wrong, but because it couldn't be controlled. So you stepped away, and suddenly decisions became heavier. There was no one to blame, no one to hide behind, no one to vote your responsibility away. Every choice carried weight. That pressure didn't shrink you, it revealed you. Alone, your thinking had to stand on its own legs. Weak ideas collapsed quickly. Strong ones survived without applause. You also learned that most people aren't afraid of being wrong. They're afraid of being alone while they're right. Consensus offers cover. It spreads risk, so no one feels fully accountable. You chose the opposite. Full ownership, full consequence. That's not comfortable, but it's honest. And here's the part few admit. Once you stop needing agreement, your mind gets quieter, clearer. You're no longer negotiating every thought. You're refining it. That clarity compounds. Over time, it shows in how you move, decide, and build. You didn't go solo to stand out. You went solo because shrinking was no longer an option, and consensus was quietly asking you to do exactly that. Number 2, you stopped negotiating your identity for belonging. There's a quiet moment when you realize you've been bargaining with yourself. Not out loud, not dramatically, just small trades you make every day. You hold back an opinion so the room stays comfortable. You adjust your tone so you don't sound too much. You downplay what matters to you because it doesn't match the mood. None of it feels dangerous at first, but over time it adds up. You're present, but not fully there. Belonging, when it comes with conditions, slowly teaches you to perform. You start reading faces instead of trusting your instincts. You measure your words before you believe them. The real problem isn't rejection, it's distortion. You begin to forget which parts of you are genuine and which ones were edited for approval. Stopping that negotiation was a turning point. It didn't come from confidence, it came from exhaustion. You got tired of translating yourself into something easier to digest. You realized that every time you compromised your identity to fit in, you were training people on how to treat you, and the lesson they learned was that your boundaries were flexible. When you stopped adjusting, some connections loosened. That wasn't loss, it was correction. Relationships that only worked when you were smaller couldn't survive when you stood normally. What remained was fewer, but real. Honest interactions replaced polite ones. Silence replaced performance. And strangely, that felt like relief. This shift also changed how you saw yourself. You stopped outsourcing your self-worth to reactions. Approval became optional, not essential. You could disagree without panic. You could stand alone without feeling exposed. That internal steadiness didn't make life easier, but it made it cleaner. Belonging used to feel like safety. Now it felt like alignment. You weren't trying to be accepted anymore, you were trying to be accurate. That difference matters. When you stop negotiating who you are, you stop leaking energy. Your presence becomes solid. People sense it, even if they can't explain it. And while not everyone stays, the ones who do aren't there for a version of you that needed permission to exist. Number 3. You learned faster alone than others do in groups. Working alone changes the game. There's no one to soften your mistakes, no one to explain away what you didn't see, no one to cushion the impact of a wrong move. Every failure hits directly, every insight lands without translation. The learning curve becomes brutal but precise, sharpening your instincts faster than any group ever could. In groups, knowledge is diluted, ideas are negotiated down, and progress often feels slower because compromise is built into the system. Alone, there's no compromise. The lessons are raw, and they stick. Alone, you are forced to confront the uncomfortable truths that others might politely ignore. Weak points, blind spots, and faulty assumptions no longer hide behind collective noise. You can't blame someone else for a misstep, and you can't co-opt someone else's credit for a breakthrough. That pressure, though intense, develops a kind of intellectual muscle that is impossible to build in comfort zones. Every decision becomes a mirror, reflecting your real strengths and weaknesses. Over time, this relentless clarity rewires how you think, act, and react. You also learn the art of focus. Alone, distractions are internal, not external. There's no group energy to ride, no social momentum to lean on. You must generate your own drive, your own standards, your own metrics of success. That self-reliance trains you to execute without external validation, to trust your judgment even when no one else does. Ideas evolve faster because they're unfiltered. Mistakes are corrected faster because they can't be hidden, postponed, or justified. The speed of learning alone is exponential, not linear. And here's the hidden reward. Independence breeds confidence. Once you've mastered a skill, solved a problem, or created something alone, you realize no group can make or break your capacity. The knowledge that your competence is yours and yours alone changes the way you navigate every interaction, every challenge, and every opportunity. You start moving with a quiet certainty because the universe has already tested you in solitude and you survived. Number 4, you realized approval is a tax on originality. Approval is seductive. It promises comfort, acceptance, and a sense of being seen. At first it feels harmless, sharing ideas, conforming to expectations, softening edges so others don't flinch. But over time, it accumulates like a hidden tax. Every compliment, every nod, every reassurance comes at a cost. To earn it, you compromise a fraction of yourself, edit your thinking, or quiet a part of your voice. Approval doesn't just acknowledge you, it shapes you. The more you chase it, the more your originality shrinks. You discovered that standing out is expensive, not because of resistance, but because people unconsciously resist what they don't understand. And when you tried to make your ideas digestible, palatable, or safe, you started paying the invisible tax. Every tweak to avoid criticism, every adjustment to gain applause, diluted the edge that made your work unique. What started as small concessions eventually became a habit, and habits, once formed, quietly define who you are. Approval isn't free. It demands conformity. Breaking that pattern is disorienting. You notice the silence first. People stop clapping. They stop echoing your ideas. That's the price of originality. The world doesn't immediately celebrate it. But once you stop seeking validation, something remarkable happens. Decisions are made faster. Ideas develop in full form without compromise. Execution becomes fearless because you no longer calculate the reaction of others. You learn that the only permission that matters is your own. That clarity liberates you in a way applause never could. Eventually, the universe starts responding differently. Approval may have been a tax, but independence is compound interest. The edges that were once shaved off for comfort now define your presence, your work, your influence. You realize the cost of chasing applause is small compared to the cost of losing yourself. Originality, unshielded by consent, becomes magnetic. People notice not because you sought it, but because your authenticity cannot be ignored. That's when you understand the unspoken rule. The moment you stop paying for approval, you start earning in ways no one can tax. Number 5. You stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. There's a kind of exhaustion that comes from repeating yourself to people who aren't listening to understand, but listening to react. Every clarification, every defense, every carefully chosen word feels heavier than the last. You start noticing patterns. Some minds are not bridges but walls, built not to meet ideas halfway, but to block them entirely. At first, you keep trying, thinking patience or charm will help, until one day you realize nothing changes. The effort doesn't illuminate understanding, it only prolongs frustration. Stopping the explanations isn't arrogance, it's efficiency. Every word you no longer waste on people determined to misinterpret becomes energy reclaimed for growth, creation, and focus. You begin reserving your voice for situations where it actually lands, where it can create impact instead of noise. The clarity you gain from this is sharp and liberating. You start noticing who genuinely engages and who only pretends to listen. You learn that your presence doesn't require constant justification. And here's the hidden power. When you stop trying to translate yourself to fit the expectations of others, your own voice gets stronger. You trust your own interpretation of events, your own conclusions, your own instincts. You realize the need to justify disappears because self-assurance replaces dependency on validation. The act of withdrawal from meaningless explanations doesn't isolate you, it focuses you. It sets boundaries that command respect, not compliance. There's also a subtle transformation in how others respond. Some will try harder to engage when they see you've stopped over-explaining. Others fall away naturally, and that's exactly the filter you need. You begin noticing that when you stop defending, your actions speak louder than words ever could. The energy you save isn't just time, it's power, precision, and freedom. Once you stop over-explaining, the world starts listening to what matters most. What you do, not what you justify. Number 6. You built internal authority instead of external validation. Most people live looking outward, measuring themselves by applause, likes, nods, and reactions. Every decision is filtered through the lens of what others will think. It feels safe, but it's a trap. External validation is fragile, temporary, and often dishonest. The moment someone stops clapping or someone else sets a new standard, your confidence wavers. You realize that relying on that kind of approval is like building a house on sand. It might look solid for a while, but it won't survive a storm. So you turned inward. You began creating your own standards, your own metrics, your own authority. Every choice became a test of your own judgment, not someone else's opinion. You measured results by accuracy, by impact, by whether you could sleep at night, knowing you did it the way you believed was right. That shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but its effect was profound. Where once you looked outward for permission, now you became the arbiter of your own competence. Internal authority doesn't seek applause. It doesn't wait for recognition. It is quiet, precise, and unshakable. It allows you to act decisively even when the world doubts you. You learn that consistency and judgment matter far more than consensus, and the freedom that comes from this is immense. You are no longer swayed by the highs and lows of external feedback. You trust your processes, your instincts, and your decisions because they have proven themselves in solitude. The world responds differently when you operate from internal authority. People sense it even if they can't name it. They notice confidence that isn't performative, influence that isn't borrowed, and decisions that don't require permission. You are no longer playing in the expectation of others. You are setting the pace, the standard, and the direction. That kind of self-governance doesn't just change how others see you, it changes how you move, act, and exist. You've become your own crown, your own validation, and that is far more powerful than any external approval could ever be. Number 7. You became predictable to yourself, not to others. There's a profound power in knowing exactly who you are, what you stand for, and how you respond, without anyone else's influence. When you reach that point, your actions stop being reactions and start being deliberate. Most people live in a loop of external prompts. What will others think? How will they respond? What is expected? Their lives are full of compromises and adjustments because they are constantly trying to be predictable to everyone else. You did the opposite. You made yourself predictable to yourself. Being predictable to yourself means consistency in decisions, thought, and integrity. You no longer allow mood, peer pressure, or fleeting opinion to dictate your moves. You know what your standards are, and you meet them relentlessly. You know your principles and follow them even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. That internal consistency is invisible to the world, but impossible to ignore in its effects. Others may see chaos, unpredictability, or brilliance, but you operate from an internal rhythm that never falters. This predictability to self brings clarity. You stop overthinking every interaction because your choices are grounded in your rules, not in how others might interpret them. The energy you once spent performing or justifying yourself is now redirected toward mastery, creation, and movement. You act with intent, not reaction. You make decisions quickly and confidently, because you trust the process you've designed for yourself. And here's the secret twist. The world finds you unpredictable because it cannot map your internal logic. When people can't predict you, they start paying attention. Influence isn't something you seek. It comes as a byproduct of consistency and clarity that no one else understands. Being predictable to yourself doesn't make you rigid. It makes you magnetic. You are no longer swayed by trends, opinions, or chaos. Your own judgment is your anchor, your compass, and your force. Others may wonder, strategize, or speculate about you, but inside, you already know your next move. That quiet certainty becomes a crown in itself. Number 8. You accepted loneliness as a training ground, not a punishment. Loneliness is usually painted as something to avoid, a gap to fill, a sign that something is wrong. Most people panic when the room is empty or the notifications stop. They fill silence with noise, company, or distraction. You didn't. You stared at it, sat with it, and let it teach you. Loneliness isn't a void, it's a mirror. When you accept it as a teacher rather than a curse, it reveals the cracks in your thinking, the assumptions you hide behind, and the weaknesses you often ignore. Alone, you face every decision without shortcuts. There is no one to share blame, no one to soften consequences, no one to distract you from responsibility. That pressure, unbearable to most, becomes a sharpening tool. Every choice, every mistake, every success is fully yours. The lessons land harder, but they land cleaner. Over time, you develop instincts that are unshakable because they have been tested in solitude, not consensus. Loneliness also teaches clarity. Without constant input or noise, you start to distinguish what truly matters from what only feels urgent. You prioritize better. You think deeper. You discover ideas and solutions that are invisible in the chatter of a crowd. What feels like isolation is actually concentration at its most potent. It's a space where your judgment can evolve without interference, and your creativity can breathe without compromise. The world eventually notices the result. People sense the discipline, the depth, and the quiet intensity that comes from someone who has been trained by their own company. You stop needing constant reassurance or approval because you've learned to navigate life with nothing but yourself and your own understanding. That's when independence becomes undeniable. Loneliness isn't a punishment, it's a forge. And when you emerge, it's clear. Solitude has crowned you with insight, resilience, and power that few ever attain, precisely because most flee from what you embraced. Number 9. You stopped confusing potential with progress. For a long time, you might have been fooled by the noise of possibility. Talent, ideas, and ambition look impressive from the outside, and it's easy to mistake them for actual movement. People celebrate potential because it's easy, because it's safe, because it doesn't demand accountability. You noticed how much time is wasted applauding what could happen instead of focusing on what is happening. You realize that potential is a promise without proof, a shadow without substance, and chasing it often keeps people from building anything real. Progress, on the other hand, is undeniable. It doesn't need hype. It doesn't need reassurance or approval. Progress is action that leaves a mark, decisions that move reality forward, and results that can't be ignored. You stopped letting yourself be distracted by the shine of ideas that were never executed. You measured people and yourself by output, not imagination. That's a brutal but liberating standard because it demands honesty. You can't hide behind what you could be. You have to confront what you are doing. This shift changes everything. You stop tolerating excuses from others and yourself. You stop investing time in theories without application. Every effort is scrutinized by reality, not expectation. You become uncomfortable with half measures because they no longer fool you. You learn to act with focus, urgency, and clarity because you understand that the world rewards completion, not aspiration. The effect is subtle at first, but unmistakable over time. People start noticing who consistently delivers, who can translate ideas into outcomes, who doesn't just talk, but builds. Your own confidence grows because you've removed illusion from judgment. You see things as they are and respond accordingly. Potential becomes irrelevant because you operate in results, not promises. That mindset separates the crown from the crowd. While others are trapped in the fantasy of what could be, you are already shaping what is, and that is the difference between spectators and forces that can't be ignored. Number 10. You outgrew environments without announcing it. Growth is rarely loud. It doesn't always come with fanfare or visible milestones. Often, it happens quietly, almost imperceptibly, until one day you realize the environment you once fit in no longer accommodates who you've become. You didn't make a statement or demand recognition. You simply evolved. And the space around you, once familiar and comfortable, started feeling smaller, constrained, like it couldn't contain your thinking, your ambition, or your rhythm. That's the subtle power of true growth. It outpaces expectation before anyone even notices. Outgrowing an environment isn't about superiority, it's about alignment. Some rooms, relationships, and systems are only equipped for versions of yourself that existed in the past. Staying in them requires compromise, adjustment, and a constant shrinking of ambition. You refused that. Instead, you moved forward naturally, silently, without fanfare. You didn't announce that you were leaving behind old limits. You simply stopped bending to them. The people who noticed were often surprised, even confused. They didn't see the transformation that happened in private, the hours of thought, discipline, and decision-making that quietly reshaped you. The beauty of this process is that it preserves dignity and focus. You didn't burn bridges or broadcast dissatisfaction. You didn't need approval to grow, nor did you seek validation for outgrowing the familiar. By simply existing at your evolved pace, you demonstrated what others can rarely emulate: self-driven evolution. It's invisible in the moment, but unmistakable over time. And here's the reward. The universe responds to those who grow silently. New spaces, opportunities, and people begin to align naturally with your upgraded version. What no longer fits falls away without drama. What remains or arrives is calibrated for the scale you now operate on. That quiet outgrowth, unnoticed by most, is a declaration stronger than words. You don't need permission to evolve, and no environment, however familiar, can contain what you are becoming. Number 11. You learned that being different isn't rare, being consistent is. Everyone thinks standing out is about being unusual, about being flashy, loud, or unpredictable. That's the surface-level idea of uniqueness, and it's everywhere. But real influence, the kind that changes outcomes and draws attention without effort, comes from consistency, not novelty. You discovered that being different is easy. Almost anyone can shock, surprise, or provoke. What's hard, and what truly separates people, is showing up the same way, making the same decisions, and maintaining the same standards over time, especially when no one is watching. Consistency is invisible to the untrained eye. It doesn't demand applause, likes, or acknowledgement. It is silent, relentless, and patient. People get distracted by sparks. They overlook the slow burn. But you learned that the slow burn is what accumulates power. While others chase trends, reactions, and temporary attention, you keep refining your craft, executing your plan, and holding your ground. Over months and years, that repetition compounds, producing results that aren't flashy but undeniable. People start noticing, not because you sought attention, but because your outcomes cannot be ignored. Consistency also builds credibility. It creates trust without promises or explanations. When you act reliably, with integrity and focus, people start measuring you against reality, not rhetoric. You don't have to justify your methods or entertain curiosity. Your track record speaks for itself. That kind of reliability, paired with the courage to operate differently from the crowd, is magnetic. It turns what might look like simple perseverance into a kind of quiet authority. Being different is a spark anyone can ignite. Being consistent is a fire that few can sustain. You realize that the real distinction between ordinary and extraordinary isn't novelty. It's endurance, discipline, and persistence applied to your unique path. The universe rewards those who master that rhythm, who combine difference with unwavering consistency. That is the crown others notice long after sparks fade. Number 12. You stopped asking, "Who's with me?" and asked, "What needs to be done?" Leadership isn't built on popularity or reassurance. It's built on clarity of purpose and willingness to act. Most people lead by seeking validation. They ask who's with them, who agrees, who will follow. That approach is safe, but it's also weak. It puts energy into convincing others instead of solving problems. You realize that asking for alignment before action delays progress and compromises your authority. The moment you shifted your question from "who supports me" to "what must be done," everything changed. This shift forced you to take responsibility in a way most people avoid. Decisions are no longer contingent on approval or consensus. They are rooted in necessity and intelligence. You act because the work exists, because the problem demands attention, because the results need to happen. That focus removes distractions, forces clarity, and turns effort into momentum. People may follow later, but they follow the outcome, not the invitation. Leadership becomes a function of action, not persuasion. You also learned that this approach breeds respect that can't be feigned. When you operate from necessity, competence, and decisiveness, others can't manipulate or question your authority without first matching it. You stop wasting energy on optics and start investing it in impact. Your time is spent doing, learning, and refining instead of convincing, negotiating, or seeking reassurance. And here's the subtle but powerful effect. By focusing on what needs to be done rather than who is on board, you cultivate independence and resilience in yourself and others. People are inspired not because they were invited, but because they saw what commitment looks like. You create standards, not followers. You build systems, not approval. Your influence grows quietly but forcefully, rooted in competence rather than charm. The universe responds to clarity and decisiveness. By asking the right question, what needs to be done, you stop chasing support and start commanding outcomes. That is how leaders are crowned, not by who applauds, but by who sees results they cannot ignore. Number 13. You understood that resistance is evidence, not opposition. Resistance is usually taken as a sign to stop, to retreat, or to question your path. Most people see pushback, doubt, or obstacles and interpret them as proof that they're on the wrong track. You learned something different. Resistance is not a signal of failure. It's a signal of significance. The harder it pushes against you, the more weight your choices carry. The universe rarely tests what is irrelevant, and resistance is often the universe's way of measuring your resolve. When you internalized this, every challenge began to change shape. Obstacles were no longer annoying interruptions or reasons to second-guess yourself. They became confirmation that you were moving in the right direction. Resistance forced you to refine your approach, clarify your thinking, and strengthen your execution. What looked like opposition to others was actually a training ground for precision, patience, and persistence. You began to see that pressure isn't the enemy, It's the spotlight that reveals what's real, what's weak, and what can endure. This understanding shifted your energy. You stopped wasting time reacting emotionally to challenges, to criticism, or to doubt. You stopped trying to convince or force acceptance from the world. Instead, you learned to interpret resistance as feedback, raw and unfiltered, about your choices, your strategy, and your impact. Every pushback became a tool rather than a threat, a way to measure strength instead of a reason to retreat. The effect is powerful and quiet. People who persist in the face of resistance are noticed, not because they avoided friction, but because they harnessed it. By seeing opposition as evidence of progress, you stopped being swayed by comfort or consensus. You became a force that moves deliberately, refined by every obstacle, sharpened by every no, and strengthened by every challenge. Resistance doesn't stop you, it crowns you. It confirms that your path matters, and those who endure it alone emerge not only ahead, but untouchable in ways others never understand. Number 14. You weren't crowned because you were chosen. You were crowned because you endured without witnesses. Recognition is often seen as the marker of achievement, but true power is forged long before anyone notices. Most people chase applause, validation, or acknowledgement, believing that being seen is proof of worth. You learned a deeper truth. The crown doesn't come from approval or spotlight. It comes from endurance, from persisting when no one is watching, when no one cares, and when everything inside you is urging you to quit. That is where real strength is tested, refined, and proven. Endurance without witnesses is a silent crucible. Every choice, every failure, every late night spent sharpening your craft or confronting your weaknesses happens in solitude. There are no cheers to soften the blows, no pats on the back to make discomfort tolerable. The work is relentless, and the results are invisible at first. You endure because quitting isn't an option, because your integrity, vision, or standards demand it. That is courage without performance, resilience without spectacle. Over time, this unseen persistence accumulates into a force that cannot be ignored. People notice not because you sought attention, but because your results, clarity, and authority emerge fully formed, undeniable, and uncompromised. Those who endure in silence carry a weight and precision that the applause-driven never achieve. The crown, in essence, is less about selection and more about transformation, the transformation that happens when discipline, patience, and courage operate away from recognition. And here's the subtle brilliance. Enduring without witnesses teaches a kind of freedom few ever experience. You act, learn, and grow without dependency on opinion or validation. Your confidence is internal, unshakable, and untransferable. By the time the world notices, the crown isn't granted. It's a reflection of the fact that you have already claimed it through silent mastery. Endurance alone separates those who are chosen from those who earn it. The throne doesn't need observers. It only demands that you persist, refine, and rise unseen until the world has no choice but to recognize what has already been earned. The journey of going solo is not about spectacle, applause, or borrowed recognition. It is about quiet mastery, relentless self-reliance, and the courage to trust your own path when no one else does. It is about refusing to shrink for consensus, stopping the endless negotiations of your identity, and learning faster, deeper, and sharper in solitude than the crowd ever could. It is about trading approval for authenticity, turning resistance into evidence, and transforming loneliness into a training ground that shapes clarity, discipline, and resilience. True power doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from enduring without witnesses, from building internal authority, from taking action because it must be done, not because anyone is watching. It comes from understanding that consistency outweighs flashes of difference, that progress outweighs potential, and that the world only notices when you have already mastered yourself. This path is rigorous, often unseen and brutally honest, but it crowns those who persevere with insight, influence, and unstoppable presence. Going solo isn't about isolation. It's about alignment, precision, and uncompromised growth. It is the quiet revolution within, where the universe begins to respond, not because you demanded it, but because you became undeniable. When you operate from this place, everything shifts. Your choices sharpen, your impact multiplies, and your presence becomes magnetic. The crown is no longer a symbol given by others. It is the reflection of the power, clarity, and endurance you have already built alone. If this resonates with you, make sure to join our journey. Like, comment, and share your thoughts. Subscribe to the channel for more insights that challenge the ordinary and celebrate the extraordinary. Your path to mastery starts here, and the world will notice the moment you stop asking permission and start rising. Stay awakened, chosen ones.